Please, you're going to need to make your way to this microphone to be able to be heard.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So, hi. The happy chaos and the joyful noises on the other side. I haven't had a chance to greet you personally this morning, or if you are those who will be worshiping in the next service, let me just say it's been a great morning so far. 8 o'clock and 9:15, and now here with you, and then 11:15 with the confirmands and those being received, and all of you who will be supporting them, and an opportunity to meet with the vestry, the leaders who have been charged alongside your clergy and staff to guide this great community of St. Columba's. So I just would like to get a sense of the room because it helps me know who you are. How many of you here have been worshiping at St. Columba's, say for, I don't know, 10 years or more? Whoa. Okay, keep your hands up. 15, 20, 25, 30. Okay, I'll stop there for your sake. Okay, so some of you, first of all, thank you, all of you, for being here. Let me do this the other way. How many of you have been worshiping at St. Columba's, say, for 5 years or less? Okay, and maybe 4, 3. Okay, great. So this is a group that has a high representation of people who have been a part of this faith community through a lot, right? You've been through a lot, you've lived through a lot, you have seen seasons come and go, you have experienced the grace and the tenacity that is Christian community, and I want to thank you, really want to thank you. I, as many of you know, have been here for a while. I was aware of St. Columba's long before I became Bishop of the Diocese of Washington. Because I looked to you, I was leading a parish in Minneapolis that aspired to be as healthy and as strong as St. Columba's was at the time, and is again now, and actually it has been for as long as I've known you, but in different ways. And I came here to learn, and I watched you, and I'm grateful for the witness and the resilience of this community. There was even somebody who asked me to put my name in to apply for the rectorship once, which I really wanted to do, but I couldn't. I couldn't because I had made a commitment to the congregation I served that I would stay there for another 5 years. And I wasn't, and I remember thinking at the time, well, I didn't say, I was like, it's not what it's the military, maybe I could. But I realized there was really nothing, and this is maybe an important realization for all of us, I'm sure you've been there, when you realize that there is, when you're asked a question that is really tempting, and it stands between you and your integrity, right? I can't say to you that every time I've been tempted and it stood between me and my integrity that I didn't succumb to the temptation. But it is an interesting lesson, isn't it? When you are in those places, when you realize, okay, Lord, and I remember that so vividly because I loved you so much, and I would have given anything to experience, and the fact that somebody here actually thought that I could lead you, I mean, gosh. So anyway, just to say that I have admired, and of course have walked with you through some really wonderful times. Mostly though, as your bishop, because you are a strong, resilient, and resourceful parish, you aren't a parish that is, or parish leaders that are calling the bishop's office a lot. You know? You do sometimes. You know, you have sometimes, and I hope we've been responsive. I've certainly tried to be responsive. But you know, it's the Diocese of Washington, which was carved out of the Diocese of Maryland back a long time ago, about 1895, was created really as an acknowledgement of the emergence of the District of Columbia after World War II as a growing, rising metropolis in the United States, which it was not before that. It wasn't that. And in fact, the bishop in Baltimore, while he knew that there were these plans to build a cathedral in Washington, and he was okay with that, because the writing was on the wall and there was momentum to build a national cathedral worthy of national purposes. This is like in the 1890s, by the way, and the Episcopal Church was really hot stuff then in the country. We were a really big deal among the power class anyway. And so he agreed to that, but he planned, get this, he planned an even bigger cathedral in Baltimore, because Baltimore was that much more important than Washington at the time. And the only thing that stopped him was the recession of the 1890s. Okay? It's the only thing that stopped him. And when he wanted to divide up the diocese, to make the Diocese of Washington out of the Diocese of Maryland, he was very clear that the new bishop wasn't going to have just the city of Washington, but the new bishop was going to have a whole swath of Maryland, going all the way to the top of Montgomery County and all the way down to the tip of St. Mary's County. So currently, the Diocese of Washington consists of the Episcopal Church presence in the District of Columbia and in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Charles County, and St. Mary's County. Okay? There are at current count right now, there are 86 congregations. Now just think about what you know about American history and what you know about the history of this part of the world, and think about all the things that have happened in this part of the world. Because the Anglican presence, the Episcopal, it wasn't called Episcopal back then, but the Anglican presence in this part of the world began with the first ships coming over from Europe. Okay? And the English settlers that settled in Maryland and what would become the District of Columbia, right? So we have churches that are, in fact, what we would call colonial churches. They go back that far. Right? We have churches that were funded, there were churches that were granted by whichever king was in power as part of a land grant, which is where most of our land gets their names that we get. If they're not native names, they're names that were granted by royalty in England, right? And so we have a lot of our history goes back that far. So we have congregations that were funded by the tobacco tax, right? Because that's how churches back in the day were funded, by the tobacco tax, right? Because people weren't paid, clergy weren't necessarily paid in money, they were paid in tobacco, right, that they could then sell. So you can imagine, you take the picture, right? And then you can imagine that other churches were established and formed, and in this area as well, in the federal district, and in the immediate surroundings, churches that were founded in the 1830s, right? In the 1820s, 30s, think about what was happening in the country then, what you know about that part of the world. During the Civil War, and we had Episcopalians on both sides of that war, right? Sometimes in the same congregation, just as a point of reference, right? We had black people, many enslaved, some freed blacks, who were worshiping in Episcopal Anglican congregations. We have balconies that were originally built for the enslaved to sit. There are a couple of balconies that still have the places where a chain would be bound, so it wasn't exactly a choice for some. For others, it turned out it was. For some of the enslaved and then the freed blacks, the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, became their church home. The separation of the races often resulted in separate churches when black churches were, when black Episcopalians actually decided, you know, we're not being treated all that well in the white churches. And also the white churches were more than happy to see black members go. So there was a sorting out of Episcopalians. Now, there were a lot of other things going on too, right? Other waves of immigration coming in, other changes happening in the federal government, in the state of Maryland. But just to give you a sense, right? And then if you think about it, you all have done so much work on this in terms of just the development of Washington, D.C. and the growth of Washington, D.C. at key areas, and the way decisions were made that put certain resources in some neighborhoods and took resources from other neighborhoods. We just know that's all part of our history. And it affected education, and it affected businesses, and it affected hospitals, and it affected churches, right? And to assume that churches and Christians wouldn't be part of that story would be as naive as our not being a part of the overall life and economy and assumptions of our time. Right? I don't know where this coffee came from, right? I don't know where it came from, but I know something about the lands that grow coffee, because I've lived there. And coffee was the market that was determined to be most profitable, not for the people of that land, but for export to people in our land and around the world. That means there are whole countries whose economies are geared toward producing things that you and I like to eat and drink. And it hasn't always had the best impact on those economies and on those peoples, as you might imagine. And so, do you know what I'm saying? We're a part of that. We're not, and it was the same true for our ancestors. They were a part of it. They may not have liked it. I'm not particularly fond of this reality. I still drink coffee. You hear me? It's like we're just a part of this. And so I want to thank you for the ways as a community that you have helped us as a diocese do our part in a little tiny way in our generation to acknowledge that we, those of us who are predominantly white, those of us who have most of the privileges in this country, or many of them, that there is, as Martin Luther King said on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, there's a debt to be paid. It's not charity, it's a debt. Like we just owe some things. And just to be honest about that as best we can in our time. While at the same time, acknowledging all the good and all the efforts that have been made in generations past to help to create a more equitable church, a more equitable society, and we've done that work too, right? That would also be true of who we are. And I'm looking at people in this community who have dedicated their lives to that work, so this is not like this, we didn't just wake up yesterday and say, oh my gosh, we're an unjust society, we better do something about that. This has been part of our realization all along, that we hold ourselves to really high principles, both as a country and as a church, and we have this life that we lead, right? All the way through. And it's kind of an interesting time to live. And it's an interesting time to try to be a follower of Jesus Christ. Wouldn't you agree? And so I'm one among you as someone striving to figure that out as best I can, and be inspired by the lives of so many that surround me, and listen for the lights that come to us, and for the ways that inspiration come to us, and to do the best we can to live as Jesus would have us live. Okay? So, what can I say just by way of introduction? I've been bishop for 13 years, which means I've made a lot of mistakes. Right? I've made a lot of mistakes. And I've grown in this work And I've seen so many, I'm just so grateful to have been part of a diocese that has some of you know this because you sort of travel in wider circles, but the amazing people that are part of our congregations, and the diversity. I presided at a confirmation service yesterday. There were 108 people who received and confirmed. And the cathedral was, there were more people of color than there were white people. Right? There were, the largest contingent of those being received and confirmed were from San Mateo Church, which is a church in Prince George's County, largely immigrants, many of them undocumented. And it's a thriving, growing church. There was a group from an Ibu congregation, All Saints Ibu in Cheverly, and everything in between, right? It was just this mosaic of congregations. Not all of them have the same capacities, not all of them have the same resources. There are different parts of the community, but they're all part of this amazing fabric. And I also want to thank you because St. Columba's is, I have to tell you, you are the most generous congregation in terms of your support of the diocese. And that is something that I want to just acknowledge. And you have done so when it was difficult because you were, it's never easy, right? It's a pretty big check to write to the Diocese of Washington. And you are the, and so thank you. We couldn't do this work without you on so many different levels, just like you're doing your own in gathering now to sustain your life. You have done that for us as well, and all the people that this diocese tries to touch. Okay? So, I'm going to stop now and just see if any of you would like to ask me a question or to make any kind of observation about life at St. Columba's. Just anything at all. And yes, if you wouldn't mind going to the microphone and telling me who you are, and, just, and for everybody else's sake too, just, yeah.
My name is Barbara Woodall, and I'm worried about the future of Christianity in America. So it's not necessarily life at St. Columba's, except it is, because we are a high-functioning church, and maybe I hope for the future of Christianity in America. But what is the role of the Episcopal Church in dealing with white nationalist Christianity? Is there a role? And what can individual Episcopalians do?
Did everyone hear the question? It's a real softball, right? An easy question. Did you want to add to that? I'll be done in a minute. Let me ask you a question. How many of you know white Christian nationalists? Okay? That's where we start. To be honest, we ask for what we can do. We need to be in relationship with people, and to be one of the and look at how many of you know white Christian nationalists? Raise your hand. Okay, it's a pretty small number, right? So that's problem number one, right? That as Christians, we are as segregated theologically as we are in every other way, and so in some ways we're part of the problem. Okay? I'm not saying become best friends with Christian nationalists. I'm just saying, and I don't spend a lot of time with Christian nationalists, and most of the people who talk about Christian nationalists do so in my world in pretty apocalyptic terms, right? And I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing. But if I stay in that lane and wag my theologically sophisticated finger, what am I doing to contribute to the solution? I don't know the answer to the future of Christianity in this country. I don't know the answer. I'm committed, as you all are, to being faithful in our time, and then putting myself, and I suspect you're all doing the same, ourselves in front of God to say, what if anything, might I do? And preaching to the choir is not going to do it. I think the election pretty much confirmed that for us. For those of us who were hoping for another outcome, and are still trying to take in the magnitude of the wave, right? I haven't taken it in yet. I'm still trying to absorb it. I'm not listening to a lot of interpretations yet because I just am not ready to. It's because we know there are lots of them. They could all be right for all I know, but I just feel like just pondering. And then also, yeah, so I'll stop there. I don't have an answer, but I am certainly, I'm right in the water, right? And one thing we can do, and I was really pleased, we can engage as many people as possible with an alternative vision of Christianity, by the way we live, the way we love. And I think that that's going to be even more important in the days and weeks and months to come. I was talking to a woman who's the rector of Connie Reinhardt is the rector of a church in Prince George's County. It is the quirkiest congregation in all of this church. And it's predominantly, to be honest, it's a church of misfits, right? Just misfits, right? That love each other to death. And she loves them. She's been there for as long as I've been here. And there are a lot of LGBTQ plus persons, a lot of trans people, right? There are a lot of people who don't have the Episcopal pedigree, but are there. And she told me on, when was today, Wednesday? So she told me on Thursday night that last Sunday, 4 new people came into her congregation looking for a church home that were scared. Now at St. Columba's, 4 new people may not sound like much, but this for 4 new people just to walk in cold at St. George's Glendale, that's a big deal, right? And they were there for a reason. Right? They were looking for a place to be. I'm committed to being that place. And I'm not saying that everybody who voted Republican are no longer welcome. That's not who we are. I'm also actually really curious. I want to talk to my Republican friends in our congregations. I'm like, okay, help me figure this out, please. Right? I consider you a friend and a sibling in Christ. I'd like to know what you're thinking. Help me do this. Because I'm not going to, anyway. See, I told you it'd be quick. Yes.
Hello. I'm Ginger Greenfield, and I am a PC native, as both of my parents were PC natives. And my great-grandfather was an Episcopal minister and the rector of St. Michael's Church on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And I've lived other places in the world.
Yeah.
And I came here, and I love it here.
Here being St. Columbus.
So my family's lived in this neighborhood since the 1960s.
Right.
And so this is home for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved your sermon today.
Mm-hmm.
And I just moved, I feel stuck. and I was left with some things like, I don't know, when I was in graduate school, my professor would say, oh, okay, what's your question?
I was thinking the same thing.
I might ask you a question, but I don't even know what question to ask.
Okay.
I want to start with what?
What?
What? And then I'm like, I don't know. What is going on? What? And then I start with could. Like, what could happen? Could that happen? Like, could this happen? Could something good happen? Could something good come of this? Like, what? What could happen? Okay. That's what I got. Well, that's it. Okay.
Another softball.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll confess to you, I'm not sleeping real well at night. And I don't know what could happen. I am confident in God's ability to surprise us. And I do take consolation in the pendulum swings of history. Right? I really do. And while this seems like a massive landslide and a dramatic shift to one way, and because of the power in people's hands, it will be. It will be. Right? In some way, it will be. How long lived? I honestly don't know. Who could possibly know? But I also believe that there is, as one friend of mine said, there is a way. The hardest place, he used a boat metaphor to it. By the way, I am not a sailor, but he used a boat metaphor and he said, when the winds change, the one thing a sailor cannot do is stay in the same place. Those of you who are sailors, you know this, right? You have to read the winds and find a way to use the winds to try to get to the direction that you wish to go. And so I feel like we have to pay attention to the winds and then try to listen for watch for the ways that the arc can shift for those of us who are persuaded that it needs to shift in a different direction. Now, did I want to do this again? No. But what then I'll say to Frodo, we don't get to choose the times in which we live. We only get to choose how we will live in the times we're given. And I believe that. And so I also believe that all centuries are equidistant to God. And so this is our time. For whatever time you and I have left, and some of us have more time, some of you have more time than the rest of us. And I'm very mindful of that right now. My main job right now, I'm turning 65 next month, and my main job is to put as much wind, to keep this metaphor going, beat me to death, but to put as much wind in the sail of those coming up behind me. And that's all I'm here to do right now. And I love the rest of you, don't get me wrong. But our job now is to give everything away that we can. Our preferences, our needs will be taken care of. We are well taken care of. So let's put as much energy we can for those coming up behind us.
I'm Joshua Gould. Just like the last person, the sermon today knocked it out of the park.
Boy, no pressure for 11:15.
You saw that I was crying. When I was a kid, I was at a church camp. Many of y'all know that I'm an actor outside of the church and outside of my full-time job. And at church camp, they had a talent show, and I went and auditioned for it. Music, art, is where I have experienced God. And I did get cast in the talent show. I was devastated. I was 10, 11 years old. I remember having a conversation that night and feeling God's presence. And I knew that I was being called into ministry. When I came back to church, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. And I got up and shared that. Out and back, I've had several talks. How do you know what the next step is? Because I'm so afraid that I'm going to do it wrong. Because I really felt like your sermon was speaking to me today.
Thank you. I know a few things about the next faithful step. In a life with God, even if you get it wrong, it's okay. Grace has the capacity to take a wrong step, and whatever wrong means to you. And just the fact that you're in motion, as someone used to say to me, gives the Spirit more to work with than if you're standing still. Right? But it's also helpful not to take huge steps when you don't know for certain, because the chances are that the risks are higher that you will regret a step taken in the dark. So little steps. Carl Jung once was asked a similar question by a woman in a letter, one of my favorite published letters, to Carl Jung, and she was basically asking him the same thing: how should I live? And he said, I cannot answer that for you. But if you do the next most necessary thing, you will be in the direction of the Spirit. And I love that image. The next most necessary thing, as a way to just orient your day. What might that be for you or for me? And as I said, more often than not, every once in a while we're given the vistas, the visions that present the future like you experienced it as a child. And they're meant to inspire us, right? They're meant to guide us and give us a sense of hope and possibilities. The majority of life, we're slogging it out much closer to the ground, and we don't see with that same clarity. So we, as St. Paul said, we walk by faith, not by sight. That's what I know, and I trust that you'll be fine.
We've got about 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, with this crowd, I can get like half a dozen questions in here.
One more. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Sarah Whitener. Hi, Sarah. Could you give us an update on what the diocese is doing with regard to reparations in the diocese?
Yep.
And if, good plans for what parishes should be doing?
Thank you. At the diocese, those of you, first of all, if you are a delegate or representative to your congregation to the Diocesan Convention, the North DC Regions meeting, I think it was last week. So, I don't know, but I can't remember who was there from St. Columbus, but Leslie wasn't there. No, that's okay, but David was there. So he can fill you in on, you can go to the Diocesan website and look on the reparations page, you'll get all the information. But the headline is, at Diocesan Convention in January, there will be several resolutions that move in the direction of policy, right? Move in the direction of policy. The most dramatic is to establish a reparations fund, starting with $5 million over the next 10 years. And then there are some specific suggestions being made about how that money could be used. The primary focus that the reparations group wanted us to address now was the harms done to Episcopal churches and people in our communities during the long arc from chattel slavery through the war, through Reconstruction, through Jim Crow, through the redlining, right? That we're going to address the harms done to our communities. That's their recommendation. That's what's going to come before the convention. There are some other resolutions around that. I would encourage you, if you are a voting member, to be in support of that. There would be a committee that would be a standing committee that would be established. I'm also aware of the good work that you are doing as a community around your own history, which is an important one in the story of the diocese and in the development or the redevelopment of this area and its implications for a Black community and the Black church here. And I would encourage you to consider ways that you might pay that debt. Okay? And I'll stop there. And see you all who have not yet been to church at the 11:15 service. And will you join me in thanking the rector of this service?
No. Thank you, Bishop Budde.